Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. We all make mistakes, that's completely normal. The question is, how do we make them disappear? We're going to look at a few possibilities. Let's dive in. So we've all been there. We made some dovetails and they didn't come out exactly the way we wanted it. There's a few gaps here and there and we'd like to fix that and make them disappear. Now normally my MO is just leave the gaps. You're learning, it's a hand tool project, and there's always going to be some imperfections, and that's okay. Learn to be okay with imperfections, and that's what I like. But unfortunately, we are all human, and we generally want people to think we're better than that. So the general answer is, well, fill it up with glue, shove some sawdust in there, and it disappears, right? And honestly, I've never seen that job actually work to the point where it really disappeared. It looks like a joint filled with glue and smeared with sawdust. But there's two problems with that. A lot of people absolutely swear by it and say it is the absolute best. You put some glue in there, sawdust, and it disappears. It makes it look absolutely gorgeous. And anytime you have someone who says that, you have other people who say, well, it depends on what glue you use. You've got to make sure it's a PVA. And others are like, no, it's got to be a high glue. And others are like, no, it's got to be a CA glue. And the lists go on and on as opposed to just, standard finishes. And then there are those who say, well, just use a putty to fill it. And they all have their pros and cons, but I've never actually tested that. I wonder what would happen if we did that. Now, before we can move on any farther, we have to specify the cut. There are 3 different ways you can have a groove that needs to be filled in. Number 1, you can have something with end grain here. If I have this gap here, I'm probably just going to shove in a piece of wood with the end grain sticking out, plane it down flush, and that really hides it well because I'm hiding it with actual wood filled into there. Sometimes the mistake is a crack. And that can be a little bit easier to hide because it's going with the grain and all of the other lines in the grain tend to make it disappear. And that you can often fill in and make it disappear. The problem is what happens when it goes across the grain, such as here. I could use a wedge in here with the grain going long ways, but then it would always look weird. It looks like the long grain is going down here. So I really want to be filling in a cross grain here. But anytime I fill that up, things really pop out when they're cross grain. So today I really want to test the cross grain and hope for the best with that. This then brings us into the beginning of the first several problems. One variability we could be testing is, do I do it cross grain, do I do it in grain, or do I do it with the grain? And I could test all of these in all 3 of those applications and see which one works out better for that. Oh, but this is oak. What if I'm using poplar or maple or cherry or walnut? That might throw things in a whole different direction. So there's a whole other variability on here. And here are just 5 different things that we could do. There are thousands of other ones out there. And then there's application methods of, do I put this on there and then sand it down in? Do I make a putty or a paste off-wise and then work that in? Do I put the glue into the joint and then put dust into it and work it in? And each of those are going to give you a slightly different result. Oh no, there's a whole nother variability on top of wood type and grain direction. Then we haven't even talked about finish. So then you start working in, is it an oil, is it a water base? Does it have dyes, does it have tints? Are we actually putting a stain on top of it? All of those will affect the outcome of it. That's a lot of variability to work through. So I see a big spreadsheet coming. And if you know anything about my channel, I want to make it as scientific as possible, and that means I need a big sample size, so I need to do it over and over and over again. And I need to limit the variability, so on each particular test, we're only testing one particular variability. So, yeah, that's a lot of work. And I just wanted a quick answer because a few people are asking, well, is PVA better than high glue, better than CA glue? Well, let's just do a really quick one and see how that looks. So I chose a scrap of poplar that had a really even honey-ish color, a deep, dark, greenish honey. And I chose that one because it's kind of an in-between color. It's not all the way to the walnut, and it's not all the way to the maple. It's kind of halfway in between. So if we're just going to do one board, let's do this one. Next, we're going to limit it to a PVA. The one I generally use is Elmer's Wood Glue Max. I'm going to use 2 different high glues because there's a lot of argument going on between Old Brown or the Tight Bond, or I thought about doing one with a traditional high glue, but in all honesty, they're about the same. And then CA glue. And on top of all that, we need a control. So for that, I'm going to be using this Minwax color fill. This was the closest color I could possibly find to the finished wood. So So I took a dovetail saw, which is the normal thickness of a gap we might be filling, and I cut several slots across the board. I figured I would do 3 sets of them so I'd have 3 sample sizes to choose from. So we have 15 grooves that are all basically identical on the same board with the same grain running through it in the same color. I made sure to collect all the dust from those cuts. And then with each one I started filling them, and I found that the most common method is to put glue into the joint and then to smear the dust onto it. And so that's the one I decided to do with this. I could do others in the future, but that's the method we're going to be using for this one. So I put glue in each of the joints. So we have 3 samples of each one we can compare side by side. For the putty filler, I actually just used the crayon and marked it back and forth until it was smooth and flush. I let all of the glues set and harden overnight so that they were well surfaced. Each one had a slight mound on top. After that, I came back through with some sandpaper and cleaned them up, and I made sure all the tops were perfectly flat by using a file to finish down the surface. And as we know, one of the big differences between these is the finish you put on it. And most commonly, the oils are the problem because they soak into the wood differently than they're going to soak into the glue. So I decided to use my standard, which is boiled linseed oil and paste wax. I put the boiled linseed oil until it stopped soaking in, and then coated it with 1 coat of paste wax. And it was kind of interesting. Some of these, it really soaked in well, and some of them it didn't soak in much at all. Now here's where the real fun comes in. A lot of times when you see these tests on YouTube, they're like, ooh, well this one looks better than that one. Or when comparing chisels, they're like, ooh, this one feels better than that one. Or, oh, this one makes me happy. And those are really worthless metrics by which to measure. So after doing my test, letting it sit, letting the finish fully cure, I then posted pictures up and I crowdsourced the results to it. And I said, okay, I want everyone to pick their favorite and their second best. If someone put a favorite on it, they get 1 point. If someone put a second best on there, they get a half point. And I compiled them all together across Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all over the place. I ended up with over 1,000 votes across the board. But before we look at the numbers, let's actually take a look at this. So each of these are going to change as your angle changes and your focus changes. And each one is going to hide at some angles and then become really important at others and different distances. I love doing crowd testing like that because you always get a lot of people who are like, ooh, oh, I know that one's epoxy and sawdust. And like, I didn't use epoxy on this. Or, oh, that one's definitely a PVA. Yeah, you don't really know until it's done. So number 1, this one here is CA glue using 2P tin. This one here is the Old Brown High Glue. This one is the PVA Wood Glue Max. This one is the Titebond Hide Glue. And then this one is just using the crayon to fill it in. So if you saw them and you voted for them and you knew, ooh, I know what that one is, now you can actually go back and see how good your guess was. But the numbers, the results. In worst place, which was really, really surprising to me, was the Titebond Hide Glue. It only got 4 total votes out of everything. And that meant it actually got 8 half votes. Out of over 1,000 votes, number 2, which is 20 votes, was cyanoacrylate, super glue, which is probably the most common one you're going to hear people is use super glue and sawdust. That was number 2, and honestly, it only got 20 votes out of the 1,000. Number 3 was actually the filler crayon. This one got 98 votes, which was relatively decent, a little less than 10%. But yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer. If you get a color that matches it really closely, it does hide pretty well. And it's a smooth, clean color. So if you're trying to highlight something or create an infill, this might actually be a really good choice for that. So that brings us down here to the Old Brown Hide Glue and PVA. And my money on all of these ahead of time was the Old Brown PVA. I was just kind of one of those things, well, yeah, of course hide glue is going to do well because hide glue is supposedly finish clear. But yeah, I kind of expected PVA to be one of the worst because generally you understand that oil doesn't soak into a PVA. Number 4 was Old Brown with about 350 votes. Number 1, by a long shot, was actually the PVA, which really surprised me. I thought this one would be the worst. It got almost 700 votes. Wow, almost 700 votes for this. So as of right now, if I'm doing it, if I'm ever going to do the sawdust trick, I'm just going to use the regular PVA and hope for the best. But this is really not that scientific. 3 is just not a great sample size, and it's in 1 piece of wood, and I don't like that. This is not enough information for me to change my habits or say like, yes, this is the best way to do it. So that means I'm going to need to create a really big spreadsheet, and I'm actually going to end up doing a pretty decent test. I don't know when this will happen, but I want to hear from you guys what characteristics are most important to you? What variables should I focus on? What woods should I test it in? What methods should I use? I really want to create a test that is, number one, testable in a regular amount of time. Number two, reduces the variables so I know exactly what I'm testing in each particular iteration of the test. Number three, I can do enough of a sample size in a quick enough time that it's testable. But it also needs to be broad enough so that I can satiate the crowds, and rather than just having, you know, 4 things, what other ways can I hide a joint? So I'm going to be in the planning stage on this for a while. This will probably come out later this year sometime. But if you want to help out with some of the function of this and actually work through how this test will happen, I have a Hive Mind group on Facebook as well as one on Discord. There are links to those down below. And on both of those, I bounce ideas off of the audience, and that's where I kind of play through some of the things that are going on. So if you want to help out with that, there's down there. Also, I want to say thank you to everyone. Hit like, comment, share, subscribe, and actually talk through this down below. That means a lot, and those things actually help out the channel. So if you do like the channel, you want to help out, hit the like, share, subscribe buttons. Those really do help it keep us in front of more people and help the channel to grow. So thank you for that. If you want to take it one step forward and actually help us out monetarily, tests like this actually cost quite a bit of money. So thank you to all of the patrons who are scrolling over on the side. They're the ones who quite literally keep this kind of content coming. So if you'd like to find out more about that, there's links to Patreon down below, or there's the little join button where you can become a member here on YouTube. That money goes directly to supporting this type of thing, as well as there are special perks such as having access to all of the data early. That goes to all the patrons and members. As well, occasionally I will turn on the video and do a live session with members so that they can actually see what's happening in the shop and sometimes the tests that are going on. So if you'd like to find out more about that, you know where to go. I think that'll do it for now. And until next time, have a wonderful day. I love to do tests so much, and my wife knows it. She reminds me often, and she says that I'm often testing her patience.